Some of the peasants, most of them in fact, went barefoot. Their whole clothing consisted in a large goat skin, which covered them from shoulder to knee, and breeches of very coarse white cloth, woven of uneven threads, that bore witness to the neglected state of local industries. Their long matted locks mingled so habitually with the hairs of their goatskin cloaks, and so completely hid the faces that they bent upon the earth, that the goatskin might have been readily taken for a natural growth, and at first sight the miserable wearers could hardly be distinguished from the animals whose hides now served them for a garment. But very shortly a pair of bright eyes peered through the hair, like drops of dew shining in a thick grass, spoke of a human intelligence within, though the expression of the eyes certainly inspired more fear than pleasure. Their heads were covered with dirty red woolen bonnets, very like the Phrygian caps that the Republic in those days had adopted as a symbol of liberty. Each carried a long wallet made of sacking over his shoulder at the end of a thick, knotty oak cudgel. There was not much in the wallets. Others wore above their caps a great broad-brimmed felt hat, with a band of woolen chenille of various colors about the crown, and these were clad altogether in the same coarse linen cloth that furnished the wallets and breeches of the first group. There was scarcely a trace of the new civilization in their dress. Their long hair straggled over the collar of a round jacket, which reached barely to the hips, a garment peculiar to the western peasantry, with little square side pockets in it. Beneath this open-fronted jacket was a waistcoat, fastened with big buttons and made of the same cloth. Some wore sabots on the march, others thriftily carried them in their hands. Soiled with long wear, blackened with dust and sweat, this costume had one distinct merit of its own, for if it was less original than the one first described, it represented a period of historical transition that ended in the almost magnificent apparel of a few men who shone out like flowers in the midst of the company. Their red or yellow waistcoats, decorated with two parallel rows of copper buttons, like a sort of oblong cuirass, and their blue linen breeches stood out in vivid contrast to the white clothing and skin cloaks of their comrades. They looked like poppies and cornflowers in a field of wheat. Some few of them were shod with the wooden sabots that the Breton peasants make for themselves, but most of them wore great iron-bound shoes, and coats of a very coarse material, shaped after the old French fashion, to which our peasants still cling religiously. Their shirt collars were fastened by silver studs, with designs of an anchor or a heart upon them, and finally their wallets seemed better stocked than those of their comrades. Some of them even included a flask, filled with brandy no doubt, in their traveller's outfit, hanging it round their necks by a string. A few townspeople among these semi-barbarous folk looked as if they marked the extreme limits of civilization in those regions. Like the peasants, they exhibited conspicuous differences of costume, some wearing round bonnets and some flat or peaked caps. Some had high boots with the tops turned down. Some wore shoes surmounted by gaiters. 10 or so of them had put themselves into the jacket known to the Republicans as the carmagnole. Others again, well-to-do artisans doubtless, were dressed from head to foot in materials of uniform color, and the most elegantly arrayed of them all wore swallow-tailed coats or riding coats of blue or green cloth in more or less threadbare condition. These last, moreover, wore boots of various patterns, as became people of consequence, and flourished large canes, like fellows whose face their luck with a stout heart. A head carefully powdered here and there, or decently plaited queues, showed the desire to make the most of ourselves which is inspired in us by a new turn taken in our fortunes or our education. Anyone seeing these men brought together as if by chance, and astonished at finding themselves assembled, might have thought that a conflagration had driven the population of a little town from their homes, but the times and the place made this body of men interesting for very different reasons. A spectator initiated into the secrets of the civil discords which then were rending France would have readily picked out the small number of citizens in that company, upon whose loyalty the Republic could depend, for almost every one who composed it had taken part against the government in the war of 4 years previous. one last distinguishing characteristic, left no doubt whatever as to the divided opinions of the body of men. The Republicans alone were in spirit as they marched. As for the rest of the individuals who made up the band, obviously, as they might differ in their dress, one uniform expression was visible on all faces and in the attitude of each, the expression which misfortune gives. The faces of both townspeople and peasants bore the stamp of deep dejection. There was something sullen about the silence they kept. All of them were bowed apparently beneath the yoke of the same thought, a terrible thought, no doubt, but carefully hidden away. Every face was inscrutable. The unwonted lagging of their steps alone could betray a secret understanding. A few of them were marked out by a rosary that hung about their necks, although they ran some risks by keeping with them this sign of a faith that had been suppressed rather than uprooted. And one of these from time to time would shake back his hair and defiantly raise his head. Then they would furtively scan the woods, the footpaths, and the crags that shut in the road on either side, much as a dog sniffs the wind as he tries to scent the game. But as they only heard the monotonous sound of the steps of their mute comrades, they hung their heads again, and with the forlorn faces of convicts on their way to the galleys, where they are now to live and die.